Have you ever had a secret that was so big, it felt like a heavy rock in your pocket? Imagine you are a king. You live in a giant house with hundreds of rooms and people who bow to you every time you walk by. You have a wife you love very much, but you also have a giant job. Your job is to make sure your family stays important and that everyone in your country feels safe. Now, imagine you find out that your wife is trying to change the rules behind your back. She wants to give her own daughter a big job and a lot of power, even though the rules say she shouldn't. This is what happened to King Charles. He had to make a choice that was very, very hard. He had to decide if he would let his wife do what she wanted or if he would follow the old rules of the palace. This story is about a shiny gold crown, a secret meeting, and a very brave princess named Catherine. It is a story about what happens when a king has to be tough, even when his heart is sad. In the next few minutes, we are going to find out why the king took a crown away from one person and gave it to another. We will see how he used his secret helpers to find out the truth. It is a story that sounds like a movie, but it happened in real life inside the big stone walls of Buckingham Palace. Many people who like to read about the royal family think that King Charles is a very quiet and careful man. They think he likes to follow the rules and not make any big waves. But most people do not know about a very big move he just made that changed everything in the palace. He made a very brave choice. He decided to take a crown that everyone thought belonged to Queen Camilla and give it to Princess Catherine instead. People say that Camilla asked him for one last thing, but he said no. This choice has made many people start whispering. They are talking about if the family is getting along or if there is trouble. They are wondering why the king chose Catherine over Camilla. They want to know what this means for the future of the royal family. It is a very big deal because crowns are not just hats. They are symbols of who is important. In what many people are calling one of the most surprising and bold things he has ever done, King Charles did something nobody thought he would do. Since he became the king, he has tried to be very careful. He wanted to lead his family in a way that was calm and safe. But this time, he decided to be very firm. He made a choice that nobody could ignore. He took a special crown that had been linked to Queen Camilla for a long time, and he put it into the hands of Catherine, who is the Princess of Wales. This move was full of big feelings, and it had very big results. Behind this big moment, there was a lot of worry growing inside the palace walls. The king found out that some people were trying to help Laura Lopez. Laura is Camilla's daughter from her first marriage. They wanted to make Laura more important and give her a bigger job in the royal family. At first, this might have looked like a small family thing, but for the king, it was much more serious. It wasn't just about being nice to family anymore. It looked like someone was trying to mess with the rules of who gets to be the boss next. For hundreds of years, the royal family has been strong because the rules of who inherits the throne are very clear. If anyone tries to change that, even a little bit, it makes things very confusing. And the king knows that the royal family cannot afford to be confused. When he talked to Queen Camilla about it, she was very upset. They had a private talk where she had a lot of big feelings. She said she was only trying to help her daughter's future. She said she didn't want her daughter to be left out or forgotten. To her, she was just being a good mom. But to the king, the problem was much bigger than just feelings. King Charles had to make a very painful choice. He decided that the royal family and the rules were more important than his feelings for his wife. This was a very strong message. He didn't even have to say it out loud for people to understand. Inside Buckingham Palace, which is a place with a ton of history and old stories, they had a small and very private meeting. There were no news cameras there to take pictures. There were no big crowds of people outside cheering or waving flags. There was no news report on the TV. Everything happened behind closed doors where it was very, very quiet. The king stood in the middle of the room. He looked very steady, but you could tell he felt the weight of what he was doing. Since his big party when he became king, he had worked hard to show people a modern royal family. But now he was facing a big fight inside his own home. Queen Camilla was standing near him. She had spent a long time being ignored or judged by people before she finally became the queen. Now she was standing there looking very calm on the outside, but everyone could feel that she was very stressed. There was a stillness about her, but it felt like a storm was brewing deep inside her heart. And then there was Catherine. She was standing across from them. She looked very graceful and strong. She has been part of the family since she married Prince William in 2011. Since then, she has become one of the most loved members of the family. To a lot of people, she is the future. She represents a family that stays strong and keeps going. She was wearing a simple but very pretty dark dress. She looked very serious because she knew this moment was not just for show. She knew that getting this crown meant she had a big job to do. The crown was not just a piece of jewelry with shiny rocks. It was a symbol of her duty to the country. The king broke the silence and opened a box made of green velvet. Inside was a crown that had a lot of history and meaning. It was covered in very expensive stones. One of them was the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond. This diamond is very famous and has many stories about people who owned it in the past. Some stories say it brings bad luck, and some say it shows great power. As the king reached for the crown, his hands shook just a tiny bit. It wasn't because he was scared, but because he knew how big this decision was. He didn't look at Camilla because he didn't want to feel sad and change his mind. In that moment, he wasn't acting like a husband. He was acting like a king who had to do his job. He lifted the crown very slowly and carefully. The light from the room hit the diamonds and made them sparkle all over the walls. For 1 second, it felt like time had stopped. Queen Camilla watched very closely. Her face didn't show much, but her eyes looked like she was feeling a lot of pain. This wasn't just about losing a pretty object. It was about losing her spot as the most important lady in the room. When the king walked toward Catherine, the air felt even heavier. Catherine bowed her head a little bit. She was ready to take the big responsibility. Then very carefully, the king placed the crown on her head. Queen Camilla stayed very still. Her face was like a mask, but her eyes followed that crown. She watched it move from her world into Catherine's world. Why did the king do this? Did he have a secret plan? Let's find out. The ceremony ended very fast, just like it started. It left behind a very strange and heavy feeling in the room. The king's helpers bowed their heads and walked away quietly into the dark hallways. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, did a small curtsy. Then she turned and walked out. Her steps were very calm and steady. You could hear her shoes tapping on the shiny wooden floor. Only King Charles stayed behind. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the room. He didn't move a muscle, but his brain was busy thinking about things that happened 10 days before. He was thinking about the moment when everything started to go wrong. That was the day he found the first secret papers on his desk. These papers said that Queen Camilla and her daughter Laura were trying to change things without telling him. This was the start of a long line of events that led to this sad day. 10 days before the crown was moved, the palace looked the same as it always did. To people walking by outside, it looked grand and peaceful. It looked like a symbol of history that would never change. But inside the king's private office, things were very different. The air felt tight, like it was hard to breathe. It felt like something bad was happening in secret. On his big desk made of oak wood, there were many piles of papers, but one folder stood out. It was dark blue, and it didn't look like the other state papers. It didn't have to do with other countries or charity work. Instead, it was a report about small changes happening inside the palace. These were changes that nobody had noticed until right then. Charles sat back in his chair and looked at the papers. His eyes were very tired. He read the lines that his most trusted helpers had written for him. At first, he didn't think it was a big deal. The thing seemed small. It said that Laura Lopez had been at some meetings about schedules. It said her name was on lists for special jobs at big events. Nothing seemed too scary by itself. Charles had always been very nice to Laura. He treated her like she was his own daughter. He never asked questions about why she was around. But now, as he looked closer, he saw that all those small things were connected. It was a slow and quiet way to get more power. He thought back to when they lived at Clarence's house. He remembered the fun afternoons and the way Camilla's eyes would shine when she talked about Laura. She used to say how good Laura was at organizing things. She would say that the royal family needed new ideas from people who were close to them. Back then, Charles just smiled. He thought it was just a mom being proud of her kid. But now, he was looking at records of secret meetings. Camilla had been meeting with lawyers in secret. They were working on a plan to change the royal rules. They wanted to make new jobs that would give people who weren't in the direct family more power. And Laura was at the center of the whole thing. The plan was not just to let her help out. It was to give her a real job where she would get paid and have real power. For Charles, this was a very big shock. It made him feel very worried and sad. From the very first day he became king, he promised that the royal family would be smaller. He wanted it to be focused and simple. He wanted it to be about the people who are next in line to be king. This secret plan threatened to break that promise. His hands squeezed the papers until they got a little bit wrinkled. He stood up slowly and walked to the window. He looked out at the palace yard. He saw the guards marching in their red coats. They were a symbol of how things stay the same for hundreds of years. But inside the palace, something was shifting. Camilla, the woman he had loved and protected, seemed to be building her own team of power using her own family. This made him feel very disappointed. He felt like a guard who just found a hole in the wall he was supposed to keep strong. But he didn't get loud or angry. He didn't scream or point fingers. He stayed very calm. He picked up his pen and drew a line under the names of two people who were helping with the plan. This was a sign that their time at the palace was over. Behind the scenes of regular royal life, King Charles was doing something very serious. While everything looked normal on the outside, a secret investigation was happening deep inside the palace. The long hallways that usually sounded like soft shoes and polite talk now felt different. It felt like everyone was watching everyone else. There were no big arguments or public signs of trouble. The king chose to be very careful. He only talked to a few people he trusted with his whole heart. He talked to his private secretaries and some very smart lawyers who had worked for the family for a long time. These were people who knew how to keep a secret. Their job was to look at every single detail of the new plans for jobs in the palace. They wanted to find any hidden secrets. They worked in a quiet room in a part of the palace called the East Wing. This was a room that people almost forgot about. It was filled with very old papers that hadn't been opened in a long time. There was only one lamp on the desk. It made a small circle of light on the big piles of paper. The room was very heavy and quiet. The only sound was the noise of paper turning. The advisors wore white gloves so they wouldn't get the old letters dirty. They looked at letters, schedules, and meeting notes. They checked everything very carefully. They matched dates and names. One by one, they found small but very important things. They found meetings that were never put on the official calendar. They found secret talks between the Queen and important workers. They also found personal letters with the Queen's secret seal on them. These letters were sent to people who support the royal family. The letters were trying to get people used to the idea of Laura Lopez having a big job. Even though King Charles didn't do the digging himself, he knew everything that was going on. Every night his helpers would bring him short notes about what they found. He would read them all alone in his office. He didn't want anyone to see him. Sometimes he would stand and look at the picture of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, on the wall. He looked at her face and remembered that his first job was to do his duty. He would hold his hands behind his back whenever he was worried. It was a habit he had. He was feeling a lot of pain inside. On one hand, he was a husband who felt hurt by his wife. On the other hand, he was a king who had to protect the crown above everything else. What made him most upset was that family feelings were being used to get power. The tension got even worse when the investigators found a hidden plan. This paper showed how Laura Lopez would go on big trips to other countries. But she wasn't just going as a guest. The plan said she would act like the Queen at some events. This was very, very strange. Usually only the main royal family members do those jobs. To give someone else that job without telling the public was a big break from the rules. It looked like a sneaky way to put Laura in the middle of royal life before anyone could say no. As they found more proof, a pattern started to show up. These weren't just accidents. They were part of a big plan made by Camilla and a few friends. It was a group of people using quiet power and promises. Even worse, some people were told that the king wanted this to happen. They were told it was his idea for a modern palace. When Charles found out his name was being used to lie, he got very, very angry. But it was a cold anger. At big dinners, he would be near Camilla, but he wouldn't show any emotion. He watched her smile and talk. His silence was not because he was weak, it was because he was waiting. He wanted to have every single bit of proof. Finally, the investigation was done. A final report was put on his desk. It had copies of letters and secret schedules. Every part of the plan was written down. The king picked up his pen and looked at Laura's name. He knew he had to make a hard choice. To keep the palace safe, he had to take action, and that action would hurt his own marriage. King Charles sat across from Queen Camilla. They were at a small round table, but it felt like they were miles apart. The space between them was full of doubt and worry. For a long time, Charles didn't say a single word. Then very slowly, he pushed a green folder across the table toward her. Inside that folder was the proof. It showed the secret group she had built to help Laura Lopez. His eyes used to be warm when he looked at her, but now they were cold and distant. He watched her very closely. He saw her fingers shake a little when she touched the folder. He saw a tiny wrinkle on her forehead before she made her face look calm again. Camilla didn't open the folder right away. Instead, she looked up at him. Her blue eyes didn't look scared. They looked stubborn and a little bit hurt. She touched her pearl necklace to help herself stay calm. In her heart, she didn't think she did anything wrong. She didn't think it was a betrayal. She thought she was just being a mom. She felt like she was making up for all the years her daughter had to hide in the shadows. She thought Laura deserved a good spot because she was loyal. Camilla thought she was helping the family stay safe for the future. When Charles finally spoke, his voice was very low and quiet, but you could hear it shake a little bit. He didn't yell or say mean things. Instead, he talked about rules and what a royal person has to do. He tapped his fingers on the table. Each tap sounded like a warning. He told her that the royal family was something special that he had to protect no matter what. He said that feelings cannot come before the job of being a king. Camilla tried to stay quiet, but she started to get upset. Her lips got tight and her hands squeezed together until her knuckles were white. When Charles showed her the page about Laura going on royal tour, Camilla couldn't be quiet anymore. She turned her head away and looked at the wall with old family photos. In those pictures, Laura and Tom were standing near the royals, but they always looked like they didn't quite belong. Now her silence was very loud. It showed she was still trying to be tough. To Camilla, she was just fixing something that wasn't fair. But to Charles, this was a giant lie. His decision was very firm. He told her she had to admit she was wrong. He told her she had to stop trying to give Laura a job in the palace right now. There was no room to argue. He looked right at her with a strong gaze. He was forcing her to choose between her plans for her daughter and her spot next to him. Camilla stood up. She moved like she was carrying something very heavy. She didn't say sorry, but the way she picked up her things showed she knew she had lost. After that talk, it was very quiet between King Charles and Queen Camilla. It felt like the air was heavy with tension. Charles was very determined. He made a choice that wasn't just about being mean. It was about making things right again. He decided not to take away any titles or send anyone away because that would have caused a huge scene in the news. Instead, he went for the most important symbol of all, the crown. In the royal room where they keep all the treasures, there are many alarms and guards. Charles went there all by himself. He looked at the crown Camilla wore when she became queen. It was a beautiful thing with diamonds that sparkled like stars. Charles put on white gloves. He moved very slowly like he was saying goodbye. He unlocked the glass case. The small click of the lock was the only sound in the room. He picked up the crown and felt how heavy it was. It was made of gold and many jewels. He felt very sad inside. Taking the crown meant taking away Camilla's pride. He knew she had worked hard for that pride, but he couldn't stop thinking about the plan to give her daughter power. He knew that if he was too nice now, there would be more trouble later. In her own room, Camilla sat at her table. She didn't want to look at herself in the mirror. Her fingers touched the empty box where the crown usually sat at night. She knew that losing the crown was a huge deal. It was a message to everyone in the palace. It meant she didn't have her special privileges anymore. It meant the king didn't trust her. The move was quiet, but all the important people in the palace found out fast. People who used to help Camilla started to feel the power moving away from her. Her special rights were taken away. Her private meetings were canceled. People started to ignore the things she signed. Slowly, Camilla became like a shadow. She was still next to Charles, but she didn't have any influence. Charles had planned every part of this so no one would have any hope of changing it. He didn't put the crown in a closet. Instead, he told the jewelers to clean it and get it ready for someone else. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a way of showing what would happen in the future. He picked Catherine to be the next person to wear it. What used to be a big fight was now a sign that things would be stable. Charles signed the papers to move the royal treasures. He did it with a firm hand, and he didn't wait. The quiet ceremony at Buckingham Palace started very early in the morning. The sun was just starting to peek through the thick fog of London. They were in a room with glass walls that looked out at the gardens. It was so quiet you could hear the old clock on the wall ticking. King Charles stood in the middle. His eyes were sharp, but he looked a little bit sad. He watched Catherine walk toward him. She looked very confident and ready for the future. When he lifted the crown and put it on her head, he felt much better. This move ended a hard time and started a new one. It was a time where being loyal and following the rules came first. Catherine was very calm when she got the crown. When the gold and the big diamond touched her head, she squeezed her lips together for a second. She was thinking about her new job. She didn't look at Camilla, who was standing in the dark corner. She only looked at Prince William. He was standing next to her, and he looked very proud. In that moment, they were the most important people in the room. Catherine looked like the bright morning light, pushing away the dark feelings of the past. Across the room, Queen Camilla didn't move at all. She looked like a statue. She was wearing a dark blue dress that almost matched the walls. You couldn't tell what she was thinking by looking at her face, but she was squeezing her chair very hard. She knew that the world would stop looking at her now. Her silence was a way to keep her dignity. Every plan she had for Laura Lopez had failed. Laura wasn't even at the ceremony. She had been staying away from the palace since the king found out about the plan. Her absence was proof that being too greedy for power doesn't work. The palace was quiet and calm again. When the meeting was over, King Charles went out onto the balcony. He looked down at the yard. He watched the guards moving in their patterns. He felt like a gardener who had just cut away some wild bushes to keep a big tree safe. Even though it was hard to be tough on his wife, he knew it was the right thing to do. Queen Elizabeth's history would stay clean. Catherine joined him at the railing. Her crown was catching the sun and sparkling. Everything had changed. A new time had started. It was a time of hard work and following the rules. Buckingham Palace was still big and mysterious, but the future felt much stronger now. A new day had truly started for the royal family. What do you think about the king's choice to give the crown to Catherine? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.